Good morning. We're proceeding with Othello. I am working on a cup of Earl Grey tea, so I feel as if I am almost qualified to talk about Shakespeare. After all, it makes me half British or something if I am talking about literature with a cup of tea in my hand. Actually, it probably makes me pretentious, but that's a different story, and we won't go from we won't dwell on that. A couple of you talked to me about having problems dealing with Shakespeare and dealing with the words and things like that. And I don't know if this necessarily helps, but I do think that as I'm reading Shakespeare or reading anything difficult, um, these questions, what's happening on the page, how do the words work so that I know what's happening, what's important about the word choice, and if the words don't work so that something is happening, what other details can I put together about what's happening on the page so I can make the words work? You'll notice that the next classification is what's happening in the text, and then go to character, plot, theme, things that I hope we're talking about in class sufficiently. Then going to your emotions, then moving out to what the author may have meant. That's always a risky thing, and what a contemporary audience may have felt. For example, when we talked about race, um, what the contemporary audience may have felt may be different than what we feel. And again, remember, slaves were brought to Jamestown in 1616 or 1619. I'm 1619 perhaps, and so you then have Shakespeare writing and dying, less than a decade or around a decade before that. So the contemporary audience would have felt things far differently than we did, than we do, excuse me. Probably shouldn't be drinking Earl Grey tea if I can't do the difference between did and do. I hope this helps a little bit. Concentrate on the words. Try to put the words in a way that makes sense. Use the footnotes at the bottom of the page. And then think about step by step moving out from the words to everything else we talk about in class. There is, I think, a time and reading and viewing question that we have to examine, excuse me. One of those things is how long should these events take? Othello arrives in Cyprus after everyone else. The marriage is consummated and Cassio is demoted. That happens that night. Desdemona tries to come to Cassio's defense. Iago gets possession of the handkerchief. Then there's the other handkerchief sewn, and there's all the things about the handkerchief. Then he sets up the eavesdropping scene, and in that eavesdropping scene, he has Othello believe they're going to talk about Desdemona. Then instead they talk about Cassio's girlfriend. We also have the Senate deciding to recall Othello because there's no threat. And then we have Othello ordering Iago to kill Cassio within 3 days, and then he strangles Desdemona. It's a lot of stuff happening. All right. If we are reading the play, we're looking at 36 hours. And I don't know where the pulp video or the pulp stuff came from, but I just thought 36 hours mixing Shakespeare and pulp, it worked for me. The fact of the matter is, that's quick. Within 36 hours of consummating the marriage, he strangles his wife. And given all of the other things that we know about him, this seems totally and completely out of character. Okay? So as readers, I think we are really, really struggling with this 36 hours. Shakespeare's scholars have come up with this concept of double time. And I have a question mark there because I am not sure what I think about it. In double time, there's something called long time and there's something called short time. The long time is going to give the impression that days or weeks have passed. Characters are referring to events that happened on Cyprus, and we're putting those into this short period of time, but it increases the sense that the events are probable. Because again, one of the struggles I think people have is this idea that 36 hours to be convinced that she's cheating on him when they just consummated the marriage. That's fast. And so it becomes kind of a problematic thing when we're problematic thing just becomes a problem as readers. Short time, everything happens within 36 hours. Passions are increased, suspense is increased, and we start having the action driving us towards the climax, toward all of these events. The sense of horror of, oh my God, he's going to kill her, is increased because we know it's such a short time. There's some problems with double time. First of all, it takes away from Othello's intensity and the reader's reaction to that intensity. I mean, like I said, we are horrified, or at least I certainly am horrified, at the idea that he can change so quickly and that he can go from loving his wife to killing his wife so quickly. That's gone if we're starting to think about it's 3 weeks, 6 weeks, somewhere in between. It's not as intense, and our reaction isn't quite as jaw-dropping, I don't believe. Also, if there is double time and if there is long time, we have to assume that Othello's an idiot and that he hasn't thought about how to figure things out. Excuse me while I try to become Shakespearean and sip on some Earl Grey tea again. And because of that, I think it takes away from the character by making him appear kind of stupid. I think long time and short time do kind of work together. We do certainly have a time problem. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that with a play like Othello, Shakespeare did not believe or think about people in a classroom in Mount Marty University, in Yankton, South Dakota, in the year of our Lord, 2021, reading this play. He wrote it to be viewed by a particular audience in a particular time. And Shakespeare, I think, is famous for, I'm going to begin with a lot of intensity. I'm going to drive the intensity as hard as I can. That's what his plays are famous for. We are going to look at Lear, and there's just everything's going to go almost right away. Everything is just going to explode. Macbeth brews for a little bit, then it explodes. Julius Caesar brewed for a little bit, then it exploded. Othello, it just seems like we're going to have a short brew, and then it's just going to explode. The daily writing. You can wait till the end and come back. You can start doing it now. In class, we're going to be doing it right here. Iago seems to hate Othello because he's a Moor. That means he may hate Othello because of Othello's race or religion or both. Also, he seems to hate women. Finally, he seems to be jealous of Cassio. We talked about this in class a little bit on Monday, but what's driving him? What is driving Iago? I think that's just one of the big questions, and I want to kind of get your opinions down on paper. What's driving Iago? I talked in the daily writing about Iago hating women. I think one of the ways that we can set that up is he talks about his wife, all right, as a scold, he um, talks about her as kind of a nasty tongued woman. There's probably some double entendre with the lips. Um, and then he jumps almost immediately to women, plural. Okay. Pictures out of doors. In other words, you are trying to be, as pretty as nature. You're trying to, kind of be that saints in your injuries, devils when being offended, players in your housewifery, and housewives in your bed. In other words, they are, very, very careful with their sexual favors. And he is casting all women like that. One of the things he is doing in this thing is jumping from a particular to this overgeneralization of all women. All right. And making all of these lewd contrasts. One of the things I think at some point in this play, we have to talk about everything kind of revolves around sex for Iago. He seems like an evil frat boy who's had a few beers and is, going to talk about his sexual conquests or his imagined sexual conquests. Everything seems to be about sex. And then he takes it a step further. Desdemona is challenging him, and if Cod's head was kind of a, you know, replacement for penis and all that other sort of stuff. I think the book has all of those in there. And then to suckle fools and chronicle small beer. In other words, all women are good for is to give birth, to create foolish children, and to do small little tasks that men don't want to do. Of all the people in the play who see through him, I think it's important to understand that, like the women in Julius Caesar, Portia and Calpurnia saw through things that the men didn't. Desdemona sees through things as well. The first quotation on this slide was as an aside. I am not married, but I do beguile the thing I am by seeming otherwise. In other words, she's going to play Iago's game. She's going to seem other than what she is. And then she jumps all over him that he's got heavy ignorance, that he can't bestow praise on a deserving woman, that she comes to a lame and impotent conclusion. And I don't know what Shakespeare's audience would have done with the fact that she used the word impotent to describe Iago. It might have gotten a chuckle from the ladies as well. All right. But I think, profane counselor, he's not able to do what he should be as a counselor to Othello. Thou praisest the worst best is what he does all the way through. And she sees through him in a way, even if it's just in this method of his, misogyny, she sees through him in a way that none of the male characters seem to. One of the things that I've sometimes wondered is this line that Cassio uses. We talked about the words at the beginning. We talked about the fact that perhaps people who are teaching the Shakespeare class sometimes go more than Shakespeare ever intended, and I'm about to commit that sin right now. His bark is stoutly timbered, his pilot of very expert and approved allowance. Therefore my hopes, not surfeited to death, stand in bold cure. In some ways, this strikes me as a peculiarly Christian speech. And we talked about reader response literature. Perhaps this is my putting things in here that Shakespeare never intended. But there were poems before Shakespeare and after Shakespeare where the term bark became a synonym for the soul or a metaphor for the soul. It means ship, but stoutly timbered means that it's a strong soul. His pilot, a very expert and approved allowance. Sometimes, There was that really, really bad country song a few years ago about Jesus take the wheel. I think that, the idea of Jesus as a pilot, whether it's the pilot of the ship, makes perfect sense. And, the hopes are there because Othello was a strong soul, because Othello is a Christian, or at least the implication of his being a Christian throughout the play is there. And so I think it's important to sometimes, ever so often, look at, is Shakespeare playing with language, and is the metaphor of ship and soul valid? And are we talking about a character thing here as he's out in these stormy seas? Or am I just reading stuff into it because I listened to too many gospel quartets when I was a kid? That too is completely possible. The last thing I want to get to today is some of the famous quotations. Wearing his heart upon his sleeve. It's a thing that we still talk about. Okay? When devils do the worst sins, they put on the pretense of goodness. The idea that, devils hide under the pretense of goodness. We've got the idea that the devil can quote scripture. Those sorts of things are all part of Shakespeare's language, and they're still concepts and terms that we still use today. And then, beware, my lord, of jealousy, the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. And then the final one I want to deal with is, who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing, 'twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him, and makes me poor indeed. It's one of the more famous lines from the play, who steals my purse steals trash. And the idea of robbing person from the good name is, again, a concept and an idea and a phrasing that we owe to Shakespeare. The phrasing we certainly owe to Shakespeare. All right, this is going to wrap it up for today. Please remember to do the daily writing. If you didn't pause earlier, go back and get that done. And I hope everybody has a good Wednesday. We'll see you in class on Friday. And hopefully by the next time we meet after Friday, the weather's warmed up a little bit.